An M1911 service pistol, Army serial number visible on the slide, presses against Bumpy Johnson's temple, Harlem, midday, 1946. The man holding it still wears his service jacket, hand trembling, hammer cocked. Zero distance. This should be an execution. But Bumpy doesn't move. He turns a page of the Pittsburgh Courier, the obituaries section, completely absorbed. A wall clock ticks. The veteran's breathing grows ragged. Sweat forms on his forehead. His weapon hand shakes harder with each passing second. 15 seconds of silence. Children play outside. A car passes. Normal life continues while a gun touches skin. Bumpy folds his newspaper, places it neatly on the desk, adjusts his tie. It was already perfect. He checks his wristwatch. Then speaks the first words of this encounter. "You're late. I told you 2 p.m. Never looks at the gun, only at the man's eyes. The veteran's hand lowers slowly, not disarmed, defeated. The weapon drops from psychological exhaustion, not physical force. FBI surveillance photograph, same angle, same expression. Case file, number 100, HQ 443, stamped across the frame. The memo reads, Subject Johnson demonstrated foreknowledge of assassination attempt. Army CID confirms gun stolen from Camp Shank's armory 3 days prior. Subject allowed approach despite advance intelligence. Bumpy knew this veteran was coming to kill him. He knew about the stolen army weapon. So why did he let him get this close? The answer reveals the U.S. Army's most buried World War II scandal, how they created the criminals they later condemned. A War Department memo from 1946, partially redacted. Recommends suppressing investigation into veteran radicalization in Harlem. Criminal recruitment of discharged soldiers reflects poorly on demobilization program. This isn't a story about a gangster, it's about what the Army did to create him and how they covered it up. They came with promises. Fight for democracy. Prove your equality. Come back heroes. The recruitment posters said military service would earn citizenship respect. That sacrifice now meant recognition later. Harlem families sent their sons believing America would keep its word. The Army had other plans. Black soldiers trained under white officers who openly despised them. They learned to fight fascism in segregated facilities, a contradiction the military never explained. Qualified men were denied combat roles and relegated to labor battalions despite their capabilities. The Red Ball Express hauled 400,000 tons of supplies across Europe, 23,000 drivers, 70% black, moving ammunition while white soldiers claimed glory. At Southern training camps, black soldiers faced assault from white civilians and military police alike. The psychological torture was deliberate, trained to kill, then told they weren't good enough to fight. The discharge came fast. 180,000 black soldiers demobilized within months in 1945 and 1946. Thousands received blue discharges printed on colored paper, neither honorable nor dishonorable, a bureaucratic limbo that stripped them of benefits. Black service members made up 7% of armed forces personnel, but received 22% of blue discharges from December 1941 through June 1945. The Pittsburgh Courier called it a vicious instrument and warned of a widespread conspiracy targeting black soldiers. The GI Bill promised opportunity. Banks and mortgage agencies delivered discrimination. In Mississippi, only 2 of 3,200 VA guaranteed home loans in 1947 went to black borrowers. In New York and northern New Jersey, fewer than 100 of 67,000 mortgages went to non-whites that same year. Factories that built the weapons they carried now displayed "No Negroes" signs. Soldiers who commanded platoons overseas couldn't get janitor positions at home. Combat trauma went untreated. PTSD went unacknowledged. They returned to overcrowded Harlem with no housing access, no medical care, and no explanation for why the nation they served now refused to acknowledge them. The weapons followed them home, Thousands of military firearms disappeared during demobilization. M1911 pistols, M1 carbines, Thompson submachine guns. Army Criminal Investigation Division reports documented the thefts but suppressed investigations to avoid scandal. Supply sergeants sold weapons to discharged soldiers who couldn't find work. The justification spread through veteran networks. Army won't feed my family, but Army weapons will. The training became criminality. Combat tactics taught in basic became robbery methods. Weapons expertise became currency in criminal organizations. Military discipline and hierarchy transplanted directly into illegal structures. The perverse outcome, the Army made them more effective criminals than they would have been without service. Bumpy Johnson saw the opportunity others missed. VA hospitals, unemployment offices, homeless shelters, all overflowing with trained, desperate veterans. His pitch wasn't criminal recruitment. It was completion of broken promises. Army said you weren't good enough to fight. I say, you're too good for the Army. He offered what the military promised, but never delivered. Respect, purpose, livelihood. Veterans brought organizational skills that made Bumpy's operation more sophisticated than anything Harlem had seen. The Army watched it happen and chose silence. War Department memos explicitly ordered suppression of investigations to protect military reputation. When veterans groups demanded accountability, the Army blocked access to records. Newspapers didn't report veteran crime rates to maintain home front morale. The strategy was scapegoating. Blame individual bad apples. Ignore systemic creation of desperation. Bury evidence that institutional failure drove men to crime. These weren't criminals who became soldiers. They were soldiers the Army made into criminals. Men told they were fighting for freedom while being denied it. Men who calculated that obeying a society that breaks every promise is irrational. Harlem mothers sent sons to war and got back traumatized men with weapons training, no jobs, and rage at a system that used them, then discarded them. The Army created the crisis, then classified the evidence. Bumpy Johnson's recruiters didn't station themselves in bars or back alleys. They positioned at VA hospitals, unemployment offices, eviction courts, places where the Army's failures became visible. They looked for discharge papers, military bearing, combat decorations, men who still stood at attention out of habit, men who checked corners before entering rooms. The approach wasn't criminal recruitment. It was mission continuation. Continue your service, this time for people who deserve it. Bumpy's organization vetted like the military should have. Checking records, combat experience, specializations, leadership roles. Officers received command offers. Enlisted men received dignity. Everyone received purpose the Army promised, but never delivered. The pitch varied by rank. Artillery specialists became explosives experts. Military police became security coordinators. Quartermasters became supply chain managers. Intelligence officers created surveillance networks. Combat infantry became enforcement teams. Each veteran brought friends, creating trust through shared military experience the civilian world couldn't understand. The network grew, not through coercion but through competence recognition. These men had been told they weren't good enough to lead, plan, or execute complex operations. Bumpy proved the Army was lying. The structure replicated what abandoned them. Chain of command, Bumpy as commander, veterans as officer corps. Formal rank system with promotions based on performance, creating the meritocracy the Army denied. Boot camp-style training for non-military recruits, taught by veterans who finally had authority matching their abilities. Operations ran like military campaigns. Reconnaissance before action, intelligence gathering and analysis. Coordinated timing, contingency planning. Communication protocols, using military radio procedures and coded language. Equipment maintained to military standards, weapons cataloged, inspected, stored properly. After-action reviews, analyzed every operation for lessons, exactly like military debriefs. The weapons advantage was psychological as much as tactical. Not street pistols but military-grade firearms veterans knew intimately. M1911s, M1 carbines, weapons maintained with military discipline. While Italian mafia organizations used civilian weapons, Bumpy's arsenal came from army supply chains. Victims seeing M1 carbines understood they faced military-trained force, not street criminals. The intelligence revolution separated Bumpy's organization from all competitors. Military intelligence methods created networks of informants, surveillance systems, information analysis protocols. Veterans trained in counterintelligence avoided police detection methods designed for civilian criminals. Documentation followed military standards, operations logged, personnel tracked, resources inventoried. Operational security prevented infiltration attempts that destroyed other organizations. FBI surveillance reports noted the unprecedented sophistication. NYPD organized crime files described military-style coordination they'd never encountered in civilian criminal operations. Court testimony from prosecution witnesses detailed planning and execution that matched Army field manuals, not street gang tactics. The bitter proof emerged in organizational effectiveness. Black soldiers could plan complex operations. They could coordinate multi-team actions. They could lead under pressure and adapt to changing conditions. Everything the Army claimed they couldn't do, they demonstrated in criminal enterprise because the Army denied them opportunity in legitimate service. The discipline showed capabilities the military insisted didn't exist. The leadership operated at levels the Army declared impossible for black soldiers. The competence was always there. The Army's racism prevented recognition, not reality. Bumpy Johnson built an army from the Army's discards, and proved every institutional judgment about black soldiers was a lie constructed to justify discrimination, not describe capability. By 1948, the problem had become visible. Congressional committees examined veteran crime rates, and the numbers threatened military reputation. The Army lobbied the FBI and NYPD to clean up the veteran crime problem before hearings could expose demobilization failures. War Department internal memos identified specific targets, organizations that embarrassed the institution by proving what abandoned veterans could become. The stakes were institutional survival. If Bumpy's veteran recruitment became public record, it would expose the Army's role in creating the crisis they now condemned. The strategy was elimination, not accountability. The Army couldn't acknowledge their role in creating the problem, so they had to destroy the evidence, the organization itself. A joint FBI-Army CID task force formed with unprecedented resources. The raids came simultaneously. Federal agents backed by Army Criminal Investigation Division personnel hit operations across Harlem. The coordination wasn't about stopping crime. It was about preventing scandal. Then came the offer that revealed everything. FBI agents approached Bumpy's veteran lieutenants with a deal. Testify against Bumpy, receive the veterans' benefits previously denied. The GI Bill access that was systematically blocked. The housing loans that were refused. The medical care that was withheld. All of it suddenly available, but only if they destroyed the organization created by the Army's refusal to provide those benefits initially. The betrayal mechanism was perfect. The Army offering what it should have given 4 years earlier, but only to eliminate evidence of their failure. Veterans faced an impossible calculation. The man who fed them when the Army wouldn't, versus the system that might finally acknowledge them if they betrayed him. The lieutenant's internal question was brutal in its simplicity. The Army that wouldn't feed me wants me to destroy the man who did? The calculation went deeper. Testifying meant admitting to crimes, but also meant finally receiving GI Bill benefits, housing assistance, medical treatment for untreated combat trauma. Families begged veterans to take the deals, end the violence, move forward. The moral confusion paralyzed decisions. Was loyalty to Bumpy honor, or was it refusing to save yourself? Was taking the Army's deal wisdom or the ultimate betrayal? Bumpy's response revealed why veterans followed him. He didn't force loyalty. He released his lieutenants from their obligations. The words were deliberate. The Army taught you to follow orders. I'm teaching you to make your own decisions. If you take their deal, I understand. They should have offered it 4 years ago. The strategic wisdom was recognizing reality. He couldn't fight the federal government and the moral exhaustion of men who'd been surviving in the margins for years. The sacrifice was letting the organization fragment to protect the individuals who built it. The emotional weight crushed from both sides. Veterans caught between the man who gave them purpose and the system that might finally grant recognition. The realization settled like concrete. The Army won either way. Destroy the organization and buy silence about their role in creating it. The help offered served the Army's interests, covering scandal, not veterans' needs. Some veterans took deals. Testimony fragmented the organization. The Army's role never entered congressional record. Scandal averted. Bumpy's power reduced, but he avoided prosecution. Veterans refused to fully cooperate despite deals. The cover-up succeeded. Public narrative became criminal corrupted veterans, not Army abandoned veterans into criminality. The questions remained unresolved. Were veterans who took deals traitors or survivors making impossible choices? Was Bumpy's release of them nobility or recognition of defeat? Did the Army pay for its crimes? Or successfully erase evidence while buying silence with benefits they'd withheld as weapons? No one won. Everyone paid. The Army protected its reputation. The veterans got scraps of what they'd earned. Bumpy lost the proof of what the Army had created. And the truth stayed buried in classified files marked reputation management. The records remained sealed. War Department files on veteran recruitment to criminal organizations. Classified. Some still unreleased 75 years later. The narrative was established and never corrected. Criminal element corrupted veterans became official history, while the Army's role disappeared from public record. Harlem bore the stigma of veteran criminality, while systemic cause stayed hidden. Veterans who cooperated received limited benefits, then were forgotten. Those who refused served time. Bumpy's organization never recovered full power, but he remained a symbol, proof of what the Army created through abandonment. Most Americans never learned the Army's direct role in building what they later condemned. The veteran from the opening, the one who held an Army pistol to Bumpy's temple, took a plea deal, received benefits, died 15 years later in a VA hospital, still carrying guilt. His cooperation buried in classified files. Even his family never knew he testified. Community memory split between those who remember the Army's betrayal and those who accepted the official narrative that blamed individual moral failure instead of institutional abandonment. Korea, Vietnam, Iraq, Afghanistan. Each war produces veterans. Society fails to reintegrate. Some end in crime. The statistics reveal continuity, not coincidence. 30% of incarcerated veterans have a history of homelessness, double the rate of the general incarcerated population. Veterans discharged for misconduct are 4.7 times more likely to become homeless. 18% of veterans in prison had less than honorable discharges. Different symptoms, same abandonment. The institutional pattern persists. Military uses, then discards, then covers responsibility. The lesson remains unlearned. Each generation discovers the military makes promises it won't keep. How many Bumpy Johnsons did the Army create across America? How many veterans were criminalized because society failed them first? What would these men have become with support instead of abandonment? When will the military pay for what it creates? The accountability never came. No Army official ever testified about demobilization failures. Blue discharge veterans waited 75 years for partial correction. Remedy still incomplete in 2024. No acknowledgement of weapons theft tolerated by corrupt officers. No admission that military training without post-service support creates dangerous desperation. The files remain partially classified, still protecting institutional reputation over historical truth. Today's veterans ask the same questions. What happens after we're no longer useful? The recruiting promises are still made, still often broken, especially for minority soldiers. VA scandals continue, benefit denials, bureaucratic obstacles, exploitation by private companies, charging veterans thousands for services that should be free. The criminal justice system still incarcerates veterans at rates suggesting societal failure, not individual, moral failure. The final accounting is stark. Bumpy Johnson's organization lasted 15 years. The Army's institutional racism that created it lasted centuries. Which is the real crime? The U.S. Army didn't just fail to prevent Bumpy Johnson's criminal organization. They built it. Every weapon they lost, every veteran they discarded, every promise they broke was a brick in the foundation of what they later condemned. The dirty secret wasn't that some veterans became criminals. The dirty secret was that the Army created the conditions that made criminality rational, then covered up their role when the consequences became embarrassing. This isn't history, it's accusation. The records show what they tried to hide. The Army trained men to kill, then abandoned them to starve. When those men used their training to survive, the Army called them criminals and erased their own guilt from the record. Bumpy Johnson was many things. A criminal, yes, but he was also evidence. Evidence of what institutions do when they use people then discard them. Evidence the Army tried to bury. The files remain partially sealed. The full truth still protected by classification. But one truth escaped. When you train people for violence, then deny them dignity, you don't create criminals. You create consequences. And consequences, unlike history, can't be classified away. The question isn't what Bumpy Johnson became. The question is what the Army made him become, and why we let them hide it.